Hello everybody, it is fight night. This is the final video that I will be putting out for UFC 245 because as you can see by this countdown clock on my website, UFC 245 starts in just under 5 hours. I'm very sorry that this video is coming late to you, but it takes a hell of a long time to plan and record these videos. But next week, we will be bringing you a ton of content for UFC Korea. So if we take a look at this card, as you can see, next week we've got plenty of fighters who are either making their UFC debut or have only had 1 or 2 fights in the UFC. This means I can go back to doing the quick format where I could do the live research videos with you guys on Twitch, and that means I'll be able to pump out way more content next week, much earlier in the week as well. So pretty much all next week I'm going to be doing nothing but live streaming. I'm going to be pumping out loads of live streams next week where we will be researching these fights together. So if you want to watch me research these fights live with you guys, don't forget to follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/Diary of a Pro Gambler. I will put a link to my Twitch channel below in the description. Check that out, and then whenever I go live, you'll receive an email notification. Also, don't forget to join my Telegram group. I will leave a link to that in the description below as well. All you need to do is download the Telegram app for your mobile phone and then come to the chat room page on my site and click this link. You will then join the Telegram group, and from there, every time I go live on Twitch, you will receive a push notification to your phone, so you won't miss out on any live streams next week. And also, if you are one of my VIP or elite members, we also now have a live streaming platform on my website. All you need to do to find it is go to the community tab in the nav bar of any page and click live streams. This live streaming page will now be used to broadcast my live research sessions for all events that are not the UFC. So KSW, Bellator, PFL, Rising, all the small promotions. And as you can see, next week is a huge week for Bellator. They've got 2 big events taking place in Hawaii. Bellator 235 on Friday night and Bellator 236 on Saturday night. A very busy week for me next week. So if you are one of my VIP or elite members, you can come to this page and I will be live streaming my research for these 2 events. Now, at the moment, I don't know when next week I'm going to be live streaming them because we haven't got any odds for these events yet. But as soon as we get odds, I will schedule in a time on this webpage. You'll be able to check the countdown clock, the date and time to see exactly when I'm going live. And as ever, if you join the Telegram channel, you will also receive a notification, a push alert to your mobile phone if you join this group through your mobile phone whenever I start a new live stream. And the reason why I am live streaming my research for smaller promotions like Bellator now through my website is simply because the liquidity is not there to do it on Twitch. So what I was finding is when I would do live research sessions on Bellator, here you can see one that lasted, where have we got one here? We've got one by, have they disappeared? Have they disappeared? Maybe not. If we just click this. Okay, I think they've disappeared. Okay, here we go. We've got a live research session of Bellator here. 1 hour and 22 minutes, 55 minutes, 2 hours and 47 minutes. This Bellator 234 live research session lasted for. This one lasted almost 2 hours. We did actually end up betting Arlene Blenko after this live stream. She came through for us in a big way. But yes, the reason why I can't do live streams on Twitch anymore is because while I was breaking these fights down, I was finding that the odds was declining on the fights as I was live streaming them, basically, which wasn't fair to the members on my website because the odds would get smashed before I had the chance to send our bet out to them. So now on smaller promotions where liquidity is very low, I will be live streaming on this brand new shiny page, our very own live streaming platform on the website. So don't forget to check that out. But I'll be live streaming tons of free content next week for UFC Korea, and obviously if you want the bonus content, we will be doing it on my website for Bellator 235 and Bellator 236. Only got odds for 1 fight so far, but I'm sure by Thursday next week we'll have tons of odds for Bellator to get our teeth into, and this looks like a decent little card to finish the year strong. Bellator or UFC on ESPN plus 23, Edgar versus a Korean Zombie. But we are not interested in that right now. Today, we are interested in the final major MMA event of the year. We are talking about UFC 245, and in this video I'm only going to be covering 3 fights because I want to get this video out as soon as possible. But the 3 fights we will be discussing in this video are 3 interesting ones, and I will also be sharing a bet with you in this video, so hopefully we'll be able to make your weekend a little bit better, earn some extra cash, and maybe you can use that to put some extra presents under the Christmas tree, who knows. So Santa Allsop is here tonight to hopefully bring you some Christmas cheer. Let's get into the first fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is going to be Amanda Nunes versus Germaine de Randamie. Now, Germaine de Randamie was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet this week, because when you look at the odds, there's obviously a clear imbalance. We've got Amanda Nunes as a giant favourite, Germaine de Randamie is a big underdog, and in my opinion, Germaine de Randamie is the best striker that Amanda Nunes has ever faced. If we take a look at Nunes' record, you know, Holly Holm, she's heralded as this, you know, high-level striker, but realistically, her strikes are really centered around her kicks. You know, her hands don't really have too much power in them, and a lot of her punches fall short. You know, de Randamie, much better striker than Holly Holm. Chris Cyborg is obviously quite reckless, quite wild, and she imploded in this fight. I mean, she gifted Nunes a win on a plate. Pennington, obviously, again, quite a basic boxer, no power in her hands. And Valentina Shevchenko, while very dangerous, she's more of a single-shot fighter. Didn't have too much power at bantamweight, and also she's very, very small for the division. Remember, Shevchenko's now the flyweight champion, and we've seen Germaine de Randamie fight at featherweight. She's much, much bigger than Shevchenko. So in my opinion, Germaine de Randamie is light years ahead of any striker that Nunes has faced in the past. And if this fight stays standing, I do actually give de Randamie the advantage, and that's why I was very interested in taking a shot on her this week as a big underdog. So if you take a look at the odds at the moment, the odds on Amanda Nunes currently floating around 1.32, which is minus 313 for an implied probability of 76%. So to get any value on Amanda Nunes this weekend, to be able to bet Amanda Nunes, you've got to be giving her around about an 80% chance of winning, which is obviously very steep, very difficult to do. Germaine de Randamie is absolutely no joke. I think Nunes at these odds is a very bad bet. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think she's going to win. I do, but I can't touch her at these odds. Obviously, the odds on Germaine de Randamie are a lot more appealing. We take a look at her average odds, call it an average of around about 3.60, which is plus 260 for an implied probability of 28%. Now, in order to get any value on de Randamie here, you would want to be giving her around about a 35% chance of winning, a 1 in 3 chance, which, you know, when we consider how big her advantages are striking, might be possible. If we look at this fight as a whole, we need to kind of figure out if de Randamie is a good value bet, or if we are putting our money in a lot of danger. So, the first kind of reason on top of the striking advantage where you might want to lean towards a bet on de Randamie, or at least not bet on Nunes, would be the size difference in this fight. Now, I know both these girls have fought at featherweight. Obviously, Amanda Nunes is the current featherweight champion, but Germaine de Randamie is a very physically imposing lady. She is the Iron Lady. Many consider her to be the greatest female Muay Thai fighter of all time, which is one of the reasons why I think she does have the edge here if the fight stays standing. But de Randamie is obviously a big girl, and I mean that in the most complimentary way possible. If we see Nunes and de Randamie, you know, square off here at the weigh-ins, you can see that de Randamie is quite a bit taller and just way more physically imposing. De Randamie also does a really good job of using this size. She does a great job of fighting long. Here, if we just pause this here, we can just see that she's the bigger woman, and she knows how to use that length as well. She does a great job of fighting long. Great striking defense, shows really, really technical kicks, hard, powerful, crisp technical kicks, stays behind the jab. De Randamie is a nightmare when it comes to striking. And I'm not totally sold on Amanda Nunes' cardio. You know, for the longest time, there were issues with Nunes' cardio, and we know de Randamie has got cardio for days. She can fight at a high pace for 10 rounds. We've never seen her slow down. de Randamie is also very tough, and she's got a granite chin. I really do think there's a big question mark over Nunes' cardio. When we've seen girls like Shevchenko push her hard, we've seen her slow down, and while there are indications in the Pennington fight that her cardio is improving, it's difficult to say because, when we've seen Shevchenko go after Nunes, she has slowed down quite a bit. When she was allowed to completely dictate the pace against Pennington, she didn't slow down at all. But is Nunes one of these fighters that's very good at being the hammer and not so good at being the nail? And as soon as you start to take control of the fight and put pressure on her and force her to react to what you are doing, is she going to burn off energy? Is she going to gas out? It's difficult to say because the information we've got to work with is quite inconclusive. You can see the vast majority of her fights over the last 5 years have ended in round 1. And 2 out of the 3 fights that have lasted a while, she has kind of slowed down in. She slowed down big time in this Shevchenko fight. Slowed down a little bit in the rematch, but again, the fight was contested at such a slow pace. It was so tentative, it was so passive, not much happened. It was really difficult to gauge Nunes' cardio, and of course, Pennington allowed Nunes to completely dictate the pace of this matchup, which meant that, Nunes could manage her cardio much more effectively. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens if de Randamie really comes out and pushes the pace here. Having said all this, obviously we know that Nunes has fought de Randamie before. It's probably easier to look at de Randamie's record to kind of gain a feel for the timeline. And wiki cappers will be looking at this fight and saying, Nunes has already beaten de Randamie. In fact, he was at the domination, already beaten her. De Randamie's got nothing for her this time around. That's the reason why Nunes is a big favourite. That's the reason why Nunes' odds have continued to decline since they were published. But obviously, that's a super oversimplification of a very complex sport. Because this fight, it took place 6 years ago. A lot has changed since then. Back then, de Randamie was just a pure kickboxer with no takedown defense. Whereas now, we know, at least based on her last few performances, her takedown defense has got a lot better. Now, Lad didn't get a chance to try and take her to the ground. Pennington didn't really get her down. Holly Holm didn't really get her down either. Now, Anna Elmos did, briefly. But the problem with Anna Elmos was that she was quite a small flyweight. Moving up to fight at bantamweight. She was very undersized for the division. And de Randamie's physicality made it really difficult for Elmos to hold her down. But what this fight showed us was that while de Randamie's takedown defense has improved a lot, and I'm sure, this fight took place back in 2016, I'm sure it's even better since then, but this fight did suggest that even though de Randamie's takedown defense has improved, it's possibly not bulletproof. And even though, Aspen Ladd, Pennington and Holm, in the last, 3 years since this fight have been ineffective and unsuccessful at getting de Randamie to the ground and keeping her there, there are things, slight mistakes that de Randamie made within these fights that indicate that if Nunes really wants to get this fight to the ground, she's got a good chance. So obviously, de Randamie is a Muay Thai fighter. She likes to throw a lot of knees and kicks, and that obviously opens her up to getting one of her legs caught and turned into a takedown. Also, you'll see de Randamie make the mistake of when her opponent shoots in, her first instinct is usually to go to the overhook and then to start trying and land knees and elbows in the clinch, but while her opponent is still working for a takedown. And that means that she's often not focused on defending the takedown, or not fully focused on defending the takedown, and it often means she's off balance while she's throwing these strikes, and that can leave her wide open to being taken down as well. And then also in the clinch, she doesn't always do the best job of focusing on defending the takedown. She's more focused again on landing knees, elbows in the clinch, which can lead her to be wide open to the takedown. Now, when you have two fighters like this, the big concern, when you've got a big favourite like Nunes, is she going to fight to her strengths? Is she going to want to try and, prove a point and win a kickboxing match? Or is she going to actually fight to her strengths, make this fight easy for herself, and look to take this fight to the ground? Because obviously Nunes, high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, high-level judoka, and a pretty strong wrestler as well. And I really feel like if Nunes gets this fight to the ground. It really doesn't matter how much de Randamie's ground game has improved. It's not going to be enough for her to survive on the ground with Nunes. And if Nunes just has a minute or two to work, she's going to stand a very, very good chance of getting a finish, because we know Nunes' ground and pound's absolutely devastating. If you think she's scary standing, wait until you see her on the ground. But again, haven't seen a lot of her on the ground in a very long time. But if ever there is a time that Nunes is going to bring her ground game out the locker, is going to be tonight against an opponent like Germaine de Randamie. So with a fight like this, you look at a big favourite like Nunes and you think, well, yeah, she's got a big advantage on the ground, but, you know, it's not easy to take de Randamie down. Is Nunes going to try and just conserve energy and try and keep this fight standing? And of course, if she does, that could be dangerous, because I personally lean slightly towards de Randamie in a stand-up fight, because we know so often fighters have a clear path to victory, and for whatever reason, they make life difficult for themselves and they just don't take it. And, you know, it would not surprise me at all if Nunes ended up getting into a kickboxing match tonight instead of going to her strengths, which is the grappling, and ended up getting knocked out or losing a decision. However, at the point in the week, you know, earlier this week when I began researching this fight and, you know, trying to cap what probability I give de Randamie and Nunes of winning, obviously a big part of my research when I forage for information is to watch interviews from both fighters. And in every single Fight Week interview that Nunes has done this week, she has not been shy about what she plans to do on Saturday night. You know, fighters are very, very reluctant to talk about what they plan to do in their fights, but in every single interview I've watched from Nunes, she has said, I'm going to take de Randamie down and there's nothing she can do about it, and when the fight's on the ground, I'm going to dominate. So Nunes has said this in every interview this week. She said it in long-winded ways, short-winded ways. Here she is saying it. This is Nunes talking about her game plan for Saturday night, straight from the horse's mouth.
Quicker?
Honestly, like, she know I'm gonna take her down. She know that, you know. And the fight is starting the feet. I'm gonna strike with her, and I'm gonna take her down and submit her on the floor. If she give me opportunity, I will knock her out. If I put in my hand first, for sure, she's gonna get knocked out.
So there you go, guys, straight from the horse's mouth. Nunes said, I'm going to take her down and I'm going to submit her. She has said this in every single interview this week. So on one hand, you can't bet Nunes at an implied probability of 76%, because if she can't get the takedown, it's super aggressive to give her an 80% chance of winning. Like, say, for example, de Randamie can keep the fight standing. You know, Nunes may exert tons of energy working for takedowns, gas out like we've seen her do in the past, and then get her face boxed off by de Randamie. So to cap her in the 80% range is impossible. But also, now that we know Nunes is, like, basically telling us she's going to take this fight to the ground and submit de Randamie, I don't want to bet on de Randamie either, because I absolutely 100% believe Nunes can do that. And on the ground, de Randamie hasn't got a hope in hell. So it's a really horrible fight for betting, where the odds on the favourite are too steep, because there's a little bit too much risk there to trust Nunes. Because, you know, Nunes does have weaknesses. You know, in order to bet on a fighter in this odds range, they literally have to have no weaknesses and tick every box. And obviously Nunes, being second best striking, having potential cardio issues, we can't bet her at these odds. But at the same time, you don't want to take a gamble on de Randamie either, because, you know, you'd have to cap her at 35%, which is a 1 in 3 chance. And if Nunes gets this fight to the ground, she's fucking doomed. So this is such an easy pass for me. I'm sorry to be boring, but this is one of those fights where you're much better off keeping it for live betting. It's a very, very tricky fight to bet pre-fight. There's no value on either side. I personally think Nunes will win. There's just no value there. But if Nunes says if Nunes does what she has said this week she's going to do, this will be a tough night at the office for Germaine de Randamie, which is a shame, because she seems like a great person and I'd love to see her win. Not saying that Nunes isn't a great person, but de Randamie is very exciting. And would be good to see the bantamweight division get a little bit more competitive, because at the moment, Amanda Nunes completely running the show. Now let's get into the next fight that I want to talk about in tonight's video, which is going to be Neal against Platinum Mike Perry. Now, in the last fight, we spoke about the Randome being one of the first names that jumped out at me this week, and Mike Perry was one of the other names that jumped out at me because, you know, when you look at the odds again for two exceptionally talented fighters, similar to, you know, Nunes and Randome, very talented. You look at Perry and Neal, two very talented fighters, and you think, well, why are the odds so wide? Surely the odds should be closer than this. Why is Perry such a big underdog? Because if we look at the current average odds available on Jeff Neal, around about 1.41, which is minus 244 for an implied probability of 71%. You know, that's a very steep implied probability to assign a guy like Jeff Neal, who really, other than, you know, Frank Camacho and Belal Muhammad, has only fought a very low level of opponent. And when you look at Mike Perry, you know, some of the guys he's been able to beat, you know, Alex Oliveira totally destroyed Paul Felder. You know, he's been in there with some high-level guys like Santiago Ponzinibbio and Vicente Luque. Start to see the odds might be a little bit off here, because if we look at the odds on Perry, currently around about a 3.0 underdog, which is plus 200 for an implied probability of 33%. So to get any value on Perry here, you'd want to be giving him around about a 45% chance of winning, which certainly seems relatively realistic, relatively fair when you look at the body of work of both guys. But in the last fight, I said that the fight week interviews that Amanda Nunes had been pumping out made me reluctant to bet on de Randamie, and it was actually the opposite this week. It was actually Mike Perry's interviews, the guy I wanted to bet, his fight week interviews, that made me nervous about betting him, because of course, who can remember in his last fight against Vicente Luque, Mike Perry suffered an absolutely devastating injury to the nose. I mean, look at this. This is absolutely savage. His nose was completely crushed, and this is a significant injury. You know, not only would have this injury cause Perry a lot of pain and suffering in the fight, in the moment, but the treatment, the recovery, the healing, the rehabilitation for this kind of injury would have been excruciatingly painful, absolutely devastating. And when a fighter goes through an experience like this, when a fighter experiences this kind of injury, it can change them forever. It can affect their confidence. It can make them a lot less aggressive, a lot more reluctant to be open up for fear of taking this kind of damage again. Now, there are obviously different kinds of fighters. You've got some kinds of fighters who, you know, this kind of injury would affect them. It absolutely would, because it was a significant amount of damage to take. Then you've got the other kind of fighter that just loves to fight. They're crazy, they're wild, and you'd certainly put Perry in that box. If you were asking me before fight week if I thought, you know, that the Perry's injury may affect him going forward, I would say it's possible, but more than likely it won't. But then the very first interview that he did this week with Mike, with MMA Junkie, the very first interview he put out, kind of said some concerning things. Now, I don't want to play this whole interview for you because it's 10 minutes long. That would obviously extend the length of the video by quite a lot. I'm just going to pick out a couple things Perry said in this video, but to kind of get a full read on why you know, Perry's nose injury might be a huge red flag going into the fight this weekend, please come and watch this this entire interview from MMA Junkie, because you'll get a much better read on how much this injury may have affected Mike Perry's mentality, confidence, and game plan going into the matchup against Jeff Neal this weekend. So I'm just going to hit play now, and I'll just play you two segments from this interview. Here it is, straight from the horse's mouth.
I don't know, man. I'm trying to stay calmer than ever, and you know, I gotta stop. You know, I don't know. I don't think I let the games that I play get in my way. I try not to let them distract me, and I try to stay focused on the task, which is getting the win. But yeah, you know, I kind of got a no-nonsense type of opponent, and so I'm going to kind of bring that same mentality. You know, it's no nonsense. I actually, you know, I really feel like, you know, it's do or die this weekend. It's life or death. It's kill or be killed. So, you know, I'm feeling very serious, which is hard to, like, be the fun guy when you're feeling that way. I feel like my whole job's on the line. My life is on the line. So
I was going to ask you, what brought you to that realization? I mean, because obviously your dedication to the game, there's no question about it, but people love watching you fight. I think because of some of the antics a little bit sometimes, and the fun, and I mean, what brought you to the realization, like, maybe I need to stay away from that?
Well, I mean, I think that it's not just going to happen overnight, so I'm still going to be me. But I got to say that the broken nose helped. That helped, maybe help me take it more serious. It's not like I wasn't taking it serious, and training is still, some days I'm like, geez, it's not like I just want to train harder today because my nose got broke last time. It's like, it's the same as it always is. It's like, damn, I gotta get to the gym. I gotta get this work. This guy's out here training, trying to kill me, so I gotta do the same. But like the pain and suffering, and like I thought I was gonna be a hideous creature after my nose got separated. So I just, the mindset, I don't want to let these guys hurt me. But at the same time, that made me think, okay, forget backing up. Forget trying to stick and move. I'm going to go forward. If I'm going to bleed, then I'm going to cover you in my blood. I'm going to bleed all over you. Because if I'm going to get hit and I can take it, I might as well just go forward and show you that you can't push me back.
So was that broken nose like some kind of like realization of mortality or something? I mean, like, was it something that changed you? Like, what was it?
It's funny that you say that, because like I said it yesterday. I was like, I feel like I'm more human than I've ever felt. I'm like, dang, I break, and pain has always been there, and it's like how I deal with it that makes me maybe different, but. And I did get something good out of it. Like now, my nose goes completely flat. Like, so if you hit me in the nose, I don't think you can do anything. Look at that thing. It's flat to my face.
Well, it's funny. I mean, listen, 1-1 this year, but 2 fights of the night, right? I mean, are we seeing something different there, or are we seeing just kind of more of the same?
No telling, man. I mean, it's a balance. There was, if you take my last fight, there was a lot of sticking and moving, and there was a moment in the fight when I told myself, go forward, and then I was like, I'm gonna just keep bouncing around. I felt pretty safe that way, and I've been watching a couple fights lately, and I saw the guy who was backing up, for example, and no offense, the big guy, Alistair Overeem, he was winning the fight, but then when it came down to the end of the fight, and he tried to skate away to his victory by decision, look what happened, So there comes a point in fighting where you gotta put your foot down, you gotta tuck your chin, you gotta go forward, and you gotta show this guy that he's not as tough as you, and he can't push you back. And you push him back. So, we're still going to get some of the old Mike Perry, some of the new Mike Perry, and then there's going to be a totally different Mike Perry in there on Saturday.
I know you said no pre-fight antics, but you did take a little shot at Colby Covington on Instagram, right, on social media.
So there we go. Mike Perry saying some interesting stuff in that interview. So some of the stuff that stuck out to me was that Mike Perry talked about, that fight making him feel human. He said that, you're going to see a different Mike Perry this weekend. He said that he went through an incredible amount of pain and suffering as a result of that nose injury. He said that he was concerned about being a hideous creature because he didn't know how he was going to look after the damage that he took to his nose. And he said that he doesn't want to let other people hit him anymore. He doesn't want to be able to take that kind of damage, and then we can expect a different version of Mike Perry this weekend. So, some of the things that really stuck out to me more than anything was the pain and suffering that he talked about, and that he didn't want to be a hideous creature. The one thing that makes Perry great is that he's wild, he's crazy, he just gets sucked into these wild brawls and forces opponents to engage in these crazy fights. And he's so good in that kind of fight because he's got a granite chin, he's extremely tough, and no matter how badly he gets hurt, he's the kind of guy that you have to kill in order to beat. And he said in that interview that now he feels human, now that he's felt that pain and that suffering. So the problem you've got in this situation with Mike Perry is, now that he's gone through that, he's not going to want to feel that pain again. Is that going to make him more reluctant to get into these wild fights? Is it going to make him, more reluctant to force his opponent to exchange? Because he's talked about, yes, he wants to push his opponent back, but at the same time, he doesn't want to take the same sort of damage that he has then in fights like that fight against Luque. So the danger here is, if you take away Perry's wild side and Perry starts to try and fight more tactically, more strategically and safer, it's not going to be the same Mike Perry. If you take away Perry's wild side, the brawling Mike Perry, he just becomes kind of like an average striker in the division, nothing special. And remember, the guys that Perry has struggled with throughout his career, guys like Vicente Luque, guys like Max Griffin, guys like Santiago Ponzinibbio, guys like Alan Jouban, what do these guys all have in common? Well, they're technical strikers. Perry tends to struggle against the technical strikers who, he can't out-brawl. And if you look at what Jeff Neal brings to the table, very, very technical kickboxing. So stylistically, Jeff Neal is the kind of guy that Perry usually struggles against. But Perry can close that skill gap by dragging these guys into a crazy brawl and basically out-toughing them. And the problem with, Perry and what he's saying in that interview is, if Perry is now, changing his fighting style to try and be more tactical and strategic and not take as much damage, well, he doesn't really have the technique to back that up. And if he gets into, a friendly kickboxing match with Jeff Neal in the center of the octagon, chances are he's just going to get picked apart for 3 rounds. So, if the Perry, the way you used to see him, shows up on Saturday night, the wild Perry, the Perry that loves to brawl, Perry that likes to bite down his mouthpiece, come forward, wing bombs, and drag his opponents into crazy exchanges, if that Perry shows up on Saturday night, well, this fight is probably getting close to being 50-50. Not saying it is 100% 50-50, but it ain't far off. However, if Perry, is lacking confidence from that significant nose injury that he suffered, if Perry is trying to come into this fight and not take as much damage and pick his shots and be tactical, then he's probably going to get outpointed and lose a decision by quite a dominant margin. And that's what makes this a tough fight to bet, because if the old Perry shows up and fights, I think there's value in him at his current odds. But, let's be real. Perry suffered a life-changing amount of damage in his last fight against Luque. When fighters take that kind of damage, it quite often changes them forever. It really affects their confidence, or at least takes them a very long time to get that confidence back. And if Perry hasn't got the confidence to turn this into a dogfight, I think this is going to be a very, very tough matchup for him, which is quite ironic, really, because, on one hand, you don't want him to come out reckless, against a very, very dangerous opponent like Jeff Neal and risk taking a ton of damage again. But at the same time, you can't afford to do perhaps exactly what Luque did against Stephen Thompson, a few weeks back, and just show your opponent way too much respect and just get picked off by the more technical fighter for 3 rounds and end up taking a ton of damage anyway. So it is a tough fight for Perry. This is not a fight I want to bet. Again, I'm sorry to be very boring, but I'm going to pass on this one. And while we talk about passing, now it is time, I promised you at the beginning of this video, to give you guys a bet. And I do believe there's an excellent bet on this fight. So you guys know what I say. Water is wet. No one can argue with that. The sky is blue. No one can argue with that. And size matters in MMA. No one can argue with that. We have weight classes for a reason. And if we look at yesterday's weigh-in between Volkanovski and Max Holloway, here we see Holloway coming out here. As they get to the stare down, you can see Holloway towering over Alexander Volkanovski. He looks a weight class or 2 bigger than Volkanovski. Much bigger, much more physically imposing. And nothing will change the fact the size matters in MMA. When you see a size difference this big, you really, really do not want to be betting on the small guy. You do not want to be putting your money on a guy like Volkanovski, because if you do, you're putting your money in a lot of danger. As a general rule, size matters. And yes, there will be exceptions to the rule. Yes, there will be anomalies. Yes, there will be small guys that, break the mold and perform much better against bigger guys than they should. But as a general rule, size matters in MMA. And when you look at a size difference this big, you should never bet the small guy unless there's something really special going on. And you should seriously consider betting on the bigger guy. Size has been the foundation for many of the bets that I've given you this year. Think back to the bet where I showed you a similar weigh-in when we watched Adesanya fight Gastelum earlier this year, and I said it will be very difficult for Gastelum to get inside and hurt Adesanya. Adesanya is the bet. Many people disagreed. Adesanya ended up winning. I'm saying the same for Holloway this weekend. There are risk factors with this bet, like there are risk factors with every bet, and we will go into them in a few moments. But this size difference is going to make life very difficult for Alexander Volkanovski on Saturday night for a variety of different reasons, which we will also get into now. Now, before we get into how these guys match up from a stylistic point of view, of course there will be people ready to bash their keyboards and leave a comment letting me know that Alexander Volkanovski actually has the reach advantage in this fight. He does. No one can deny that. He has just over a 2-inch reach advantage over Holloway. And we do know, statistically, reach is a much bigger advantage than height. However, if you look at the size difference between these two men, the size difference is significant here. And this size difference is going to make it much more difficult for Volkanovski to control Holloway in grappling exchanges, and much more difficult for him to get inside and land his power right hand. It's just the way it is. It's fucking physics. Don't be the guy that puts his money in unnecessary danger. I'm not saying you have to bet Holloway, but definitely don't bet Volkanovski. I feel, I use this analogy a lot, but if you bet Volkanovski this weekend, you are the moth getting attracted to the bug zapper. There is just no reason to bet on a guy like Volkanovski in a fight like this. There are much stronger positions to put your money this weekend, irrespective of how you feel about this fight. So really, I feel like the best way to explain the reasons why Holloway is such a good bet this weekend is to talk about the fight from a technical point of view across the three ranges that this matchup could take place. The grappling, the clinch, and the striking. And then talk about the risk factors which are present, because Volkanovski is an incredibly talented fighter. He can definitely beat Holloway. There's absolutely no doubt about it. I'm not saying, bet your daughter's hamster on it. I'm not saying sell your son's Xbox and bet that on it either. All I'm saying is, based on all the information we've got available to us, Holloway's a great bet this weekend. So first of all, let's talk about the grappling, which seems to be the most obvious path to victory for Volkanovski. And ironically, I really feel like this is probably the area in which Volkanovski poses the least threat to Holloway, which is ironic because many people betting Volkanovski are betting it based on the fact they believe Volkanovski's wrestling is going to be a problem for Holloway. I am like 90% sure that it's not going to be. Volkanovski's grappling is very rudimentary. His offensive wrestling is very poor. If you go and watch Volkanovski's fights, you'll see that the vast majority of his offensive wrestling takedown shots come above hip height. And obviously we know Max Holloway has got great balance, and it's extremely difficult to take him down unless you get in very deep on his hips. Now this is one area where the size difference will actually be an advantage for Volkanovski, because being the shorter man, it will make it easier for him to drive in deep on Holloway's hips. But as we saw in his last fight against Frankie Edgar, Frankie Edgar is an NCAA Division I level wrestler. He tried to take Holloway down with various different takedown techniques and really was mostly unsuccessful. Volkanovski, really all he has in his locker is a basic double leg that comes above hip height. It's not going to be enough to cause Holloway a problem. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'd be really surprised. And then, of course, the one way that Frankie Edgar was able to get Holloway down, he did hit one takedown in that last fight, was by chaining, I believe he chained a single leg takedown into like a body lock takedown and was able to drag Holloway to the ground. Problem is, if you go back and watch Volkanovski's fights, he has no chain wrestling. Volkanovski, he comes from a rugby background, doesn't come from a wrestling background. This is why his wrestling is very basic, and when you see him shooting, he's a single shot wrestler. Shoots a single shot, and then if he doesn't get that takedown, he just reverts to the clinch. Now, that isn't going to be enough to take Holloway down. The only time we've seen Holloway taken down is when his opponents have used chain wrestling. And up until this point in his career, Volkanovski's never shown that. Maybe he will have improved an incredible amount in a short space of time and show up with chain wrestling on Saturday night, but we can't account for that. And that's why they call it gambling. If Volkanovski shows up with, vastly improved offensive wrestling, starts chaining loads of takedowns together on Saturday night, and he grapple fucks Holloway, we just have to take it on the chin, and that's gambling at the end of the day. But based on pre-fight research, based on past performances, that's incredibly unlikely. Again, we talk about how the size difference can be an advantage for Volkanovski when it comes to grapplings. He'll make it deeper to shoot in on Holloway, but it will also be a disadvantage because obviously Holloway is the much bigger man. So if Volkanovski is able to get the fight to the ground, it will be much more difficult for Volkanovski to hold Holloway down for any period of time, because the size difference will make it much easier for Holloway to power his way back to his feet. And also, when you look at Holloway, how tricky he is with his takedown defense, does a great job of getting underhooks in play early. One of the reasons why Holloway is so easy to hit, particularly when he's fighting wrestlers, is because he does keep his hands low, which means when his opponents do shoot in, he does a good job of getting the overhook, the underhook in play early, stuffing the takedown. So that takes us nicely into the second range where this fight could take place, which is the clinch. And again, I see a lot of people talking about Volkanovski potentially being able to control Holloway in the clinch, but I don't really see this as being a realistic path to victory. We know under the new scoring that came in play in January 2017, the clinch is a 50-50 position. No longer the fighter with their back against the cage is the fighter that's losing. And I just don't see Volkanovski being able to do enough damage or put a big enough stamp on a round to really impact this fight from the clinch. And also, if you go back and watch Holloway's past fights, as soon as you give him an inch of space in the clinch, he does a great job of using the overhook to disengage and circle his back off the cage, get the fight back into kickboxing range in the middle of the octagon. It's very, very difficult to control Holloway's body because he's always fighting hands on the one side and gets a strong overhook on the other. So I don't believe Volkanovski's going to have any success in the clinch. I don't believe he's going to have much success when it comes to wrestling as well. So then the final range for us to discuss in this fight is the striking. And even the most hardcore Volkanovski fan, even Volkanovski's mum and dad, would have to admit that Holloway is a significantly better striker than Alexander Volkanovski. Now that doesn't mean Volkanovski can't have success against Holloway, but it does make it a much more difficult fight for Volkanovski if this fight stays standing, because that's Holloway's wheelhouse, right? That's what he does best. Now, if the fight stays standing, Volkanovski's got a very, very basic style of striking. Stands very flat-footed right in front of his opponent, doesn't do a particularly good job of pressuring his opponents, and throws pretty much the same, jab, jab, right hook combo. With Volkanovski's striking again being so basic, it's going to be very difficult for him to get inside and land power strikes on Holloway, because even though Volkanovski's got the reach advantage, we know Holloway does a great job of fighting long. Some people point to Volkanovski's leg kicks as a potential area that could cause Holloway a problem. But remember, the best counter to a leg kick is a punch in the face, and in order for Volkanovski to get into a range where he can land a leg kick, he's going to be exposing himself to devastating head strikes, and we know how dangerous Holloway can be with his fast hands and combinations. We've seen how much damage he's inflicted on past opponents. So it's a very, very difficult fight for Volkanovski in whatever range this takes place. I personally believe Holloway's going to be able to keep this fight standing quite easily and just be able to outpoint and box Volkanovski's face off across the 5 rounds. Now, if we think about how Holloway usually fights, he usually starts very slow, so I do expect Volkanovski to have a decent amount of success in round 1 and 2, but into the 3rd, 4th and 5th rounds, it should be one-way traffic. It should be all Holloway. And remember, it is not like Volkanovski's invincible. He got wobbled by Darren Elkins, and he also got dropped twice by Chad Mendes. In fact, Chad Mendes was pretty much dominating before he gassed out, but of course Mendes already had one fight out the door and was well on his way to retirement. But Mendes caused Volkanovski all kinds of problems. You know, we know Holloway's got a granite chin. I'm not saying Volkanovski can't knock him out, but what I would say is Volkanovski doesn't really have that much power either. You know, I see a lot of people this week talking about Volkanovski's power, and for me, it's a bit of a fallacy. It's not backed up by any evidence. You know, if we look at his past fights, you know, went the distance with Darren Elkins. I mean, we all know how easy Darren Elkins is to hit. We all know how bad Darren Elkins' striking defense is. If Volkanovski was that powerful and dangerous, surely he would have been able to put Darren Elkins away. We also saw him go the distance with Shane Young. I believe Young took this fight on like a week's notice. Very young, inexperienced fighter. And less than 2 years ago, he also went the distance with Mizuto Hirota. So surely, if Volkanovski was this powerhouse that people describe him as, he wouldn't be going the distance with guys like Darren Elkins, Shane Young and Mizuto Hirota over the last 2 years. And of course we know Holloway has got a granite chin, and the size difference will make it very, very difficult for Alexander Volkanovski to get inside that boxing range and land his power strikes. But now we do have to talk about red flags. Or not red flags, but risk factors, because every single bet you place will always have risk factors. You will never find a bet free of risk. And I believe there are two big risk factors with this fight. There are two ways that Holloway can lose this fight. So I don't believe Volkanovski can do anything to him with his wrestling. Don't believe he can do anything to him with his clinch. And I believe if the fight stays standing and goes 5 rounds, Holloway will win by a massive margin. I think he'll outstrike Volkanovski quite easily. So how can Volkanovski win this fight? Well, the two huge risk factors for me in this matchup is the first one is Holloway's striking defense. Whichever way you dress it up, this guy is very easy to hit. For whatever reason, he just doesn't block the right hand. If you go back and watch any of his fights, in particular the Frankie Edgar fight, you will see Frankie repeatedly land right hooks over and over and over again. Ortega was able to land multiple right hands, and Poirier was pretty much able to land whatever he wanted. The problem I have with Holloway is that he's so comfortable in boxing range. He's so confident in his chin, so confident in his ability to roll with the punches and slip shots, that he does take a lot of unnecessary damage. He's more than happy to let his opponent land the right hand for him to get into boxing range and uncork his own 4 or 5 strike combo. But of course we know it only takes one shot to change the course of a fight. We saw him rocked multiple times in the Dustin Poirier fight, and it is a big concern how easy he is to hit. For whatever reason, he's very, very susceptible to getting caught with the right hand. And, you know, at the end of the day, I'm just a geek from Wales that sits in his pants watching fights all day. If I can spot this weakness in Holloway, you bet your ass that an MMA genius like Eugene Behrman, you know, the Alexander Volkanovski's head coach, the mastermind behind City Kickboxing, if I can spot this weakness in Holloway, you bet your ass Behrman has, and you bet your ass Volkanovski has got a game plan in place for tonight where they're going to try and exploit that. But obviously, it's easier said than done, and at the end of the day, the size difference is going to make it very hard for Volkanovski to get inside and land the power shot. And at the same time, I just don't think Volkanovski carries too much power in his hands, and historically, Holloway's got a granite chin. You know, if he can go the distance, stand in the pocket and exchange bombs with a huge, powerful, heavy-hitting southpaw like Poirier in the lightweight division, then he's probably going to be able to deal with an undersized, small, wrestle boxer in the featherweight division. Anything can happen. Volkanovski could knock him out. You know, he could land a Hail Mary flash KO, but it's unlikely. And at the end of the day, we're trying to put our money in strong positions, and we have to place bets, right? We can't just pass on every bet for any slight risk factor. That's one of the biggest risk factors for me. Another risk factor with this fight is obviously Holloway is a big guy. You know, we talk about all the ways that this size difference will be an advantage for Holloway. Well, there are ways that it will be a disadvantage as well, and obviously his cut to 145 pounds is brutal. We know that when a fighter goes through a tough weight cut, their chin can suffer, and you know, as Holloway's getting older, as he's gone through more and more and more weight cuts, every time he goes through one of these brutal weight cuts, it's going to take something out of him. You know, at what point does it start to cost him? You know, will his chin hold up? he actually looked better than he usually does weighing in yesterday. Not great, but he actually looked okay. Certainly looks healthy here, but the big weight cut is certainly a concern, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the fact that he is very hittable. If Volkanovski lands a bomb, he can definitely put him away, but I don't see Volkanovski being able to cause Holloway a problem with his wrestling. Don't see him being able to cause Holloway a problem in the clinch, and it's extremely unlikely that Volkanovski wins a stand-up fight across 5 rounds. Much more likely Holloway uses his superior technique to just chip away at him, outpoint him, and win quite a dominant decision. So I feel, we're always looking for strong positions to put our money. You won't find many stronger positions to put your money than Holloway this weekend. Volkanovski does have paths to victory, but his paths to victory are very unlikely. And if we look at the current odds on this fight, we can see that Max Holloway currently around about a 1.59 favourite, which is minus 169 for an implied probability of 63%. When you think of really the only way Volkanovski's got to win this fight is by knockout, and he's giving up a big size disadvantage, doesn't really hit that hard. It's kind of difficult to see Volkanovski flash KO in Holloway. Could happen, but I doubt it. So in my opinion, it's really fair to cap Holloway in the 70 to 80% range in this fight, because realistically Volkanovski's only got a puncher's chance, and he just so happens to be fighting a guy with a granite chin, a big technical advantage over him, a big size advantage over him. It's a no-brainer bet for me. I think Holloway is one of my favourite bets in a while, to be honest, and certainly the best bet on tonight's card. So that is going to be it, guys, for today's video. If you want loads more fight content, loads more betting content next week, don't forget to check me out on Twitch. I will leave a link to the description below. And also, if you're one of my VIP or elite members, don't forget that I'll be live streaming tons of content also on my website next week. But for now, guys, take care. I hope you crush it tonight. I hope you make a ton of money, and fingers crossed Holloway comes through for us. Love you guys. Have a great weekend.